Well, good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to this announcement of the results of a multi-month process here in the Senate to create a piece of legislation which we call an act enhancing reform, innovation, and success in education, from this point forward known as the RISE Act. What we were seeking to accomplish here in the Senate through this work of the working group members who are standing behind me, and you will hear from each of them as we proceed this morning with our work and announcement. What we were seeking to accomplish through this exercise was to step back and do what we would call a 20-year review and revise exercise based upon the work that was done to provide choice in education, to create excellence in education here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which started in 1993 with the Education Reform Act of that year. And it was our goal in this exercise to identify the best practices that were being undertaken and exercised in the combination of Commonwealth charter schools, Horace Mann charter schools, and innovation schools. It was our goal further to ensure that this discussion focused on 100% of the children in public education in Massachusetts, whether they be in a traditional school district seat, whether they occupied a seat in an innovation school, or in a Commonwealth charter school, or in a Horace Mann school. Because every child in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts deserves the best education and that they can benefit by, so that they can take their place in society, achieve their goals, and excel here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, first as students and then as adults taking their place in society, in the workforce, at home, and in their communities. So we focused on trying to understand what the concerns were that people have been raising about advancing excellent education for every child in every setting, and then to identify the best practices and try to ensure that they would be applied to all children in whatever setting that they were in. And we know that in the case of charter schools, Commonwealth charters and Horace Mann charters, that these are innovation schools which are experimental in nature, and we expect that things are going to be tried. Many of those things will succeed, some of them will not. What comes with the success is the opportunity then to replicate both inside the innovation and charter schools and within the traditional public school classrooms. So we focused on funding, we focused on transparency and governance, and we focused on ensuring that the children who were in the various types of schools, again, Commonwealth charter, Horace Mann charter, and innovation schools, look like the diverse populations having the diverse experiences that you would find in the traditional public schools and in those other settings. And the idea is to spread the best practices within each of those segments and across those segments, so that we improve education at every opportunity for every child in every type of setting. So this bill goes significantly beyond where we started, because when this debate started in 1993, we said we were going to experiment and do 25 charter schools, and then 2 other times, I believe, we increased the cap for Commonwealth charter schools and added the Horace Mann charter schools and added innovation schools. And then in 2010, we shifted the focus from counting the number of schools and charters to the number of seats and children by focusing on net school spending. And we succeeded in 2010 in shifting that paradigm, but in 2014, as you know, the House of Representatives passed a bill along the same lines by increasing net school spending, but the Senate was unable to muster a majority for that, because the feeling among the senators was that although some were very strongly in favor of Commonwealth charters, others may have been less enthusiastic about it, but the broad middle wanted us to address the kinds of concerns that had been raised in the buckets or areas that I just mentioned, and you're going to hear some of the specific solutions from my colleagues who served on the working group in just a minute, so that we take the best experience of these last 20 years in each of these areas, because there's nothing new under the sun. Virtually anything you can think of has been tried somewhere and succeeded, and if it's been successful in one place, we hope it can be successful in more places, and if successful in more places, we hope can become the standard and the standard to which we would hold all of the schools that participate in these various programs. So with that, I'm going to thank publicly first the members of the working group, Senator Chang Diaz as the chair of the Education Committee and led this effort in this working group, Senator Jalen, who's vice chair of the Education Committee with Senator Chang Diaz as chair, and also chair of our Special Senate Committee on Innovation and Education. And also Senator Wolf, who has experience as a father of two graduates of a charter school, having sat on the board of a charter school, and a very successful business owner, and have helped build a very large and successful business on the Cape. And then finally, but certainly not least, Senator Karen Spilka, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. These individuals spent many hundreds of hours with their staffs over the last 8 weeks crafting the piece of legislation that we are unveiling today. And so with that, I'm going to ask Senator Chang Diaz to come to the microphone and to begin the description of critical elements in the RISE Act.
Good morning, everybody. Everyone awake? You're about to be. I first, before I dive into the details, I also want to sort of pick up where the Senate President left off and really thank him and my colleagues on this sort of team of rivals behind me. This has been an extraordinary process, and I'm incredibly proud to stand here with you all to announce this bill today. We are putting forth legislation today that, very importantly, at a bottom line, puts forth tens of thousands of new seats in innovative classrooms targeted to districts that are struggling the most. And this bill also lays the groundwork for replication of best practices, both among charters themselves and between charter and district systems. 96% of our kids in Massachusetts are educated in district schools. 96% are educated in district schools. 4% are educated currently in charter schools. And even if you assume that the current wait list is totally accurate and you were to clear the entire wait list, that would be 8% of students in our Commonwealth that would be educated through charter schools, while 92% will continue to be educated in the districts. It is our responsibility as a legislature and as a Commonwealth to address students who are stuck in the achievement gap, no matter what kind of schoolhouse they are sitting in. That's why this bill does the following. First, for schools that serve at-risk, high-risk populations, this bill completely blows up the cap on those types of schools. For the first time ever, we will adopt in Massachusetts a category of charter school that is unlimited. So where Massachusetts, for example, saw 5,000 students drop out of school last year, if a school is primarily serving those students, no cap applies. Massachusetts has roughly 17,000 children who are homeless and who face enormous odds of ever graduating. If a school is primarily serving those students, no cap applies. And if a school is serving pregnant or parenting teens who are 40% less likely to ever graduate from high school than their peers, no cap applies. For charters that are not serving these high-risk populations, this bill that we are releasing today raises the cap on charter seats in the lowest performing districts from the 18% that's currently in statute of net school spending to 23% of net school spending at a rate of 0.5% a year. The bill also incentivizes districts to bring forth more innovative classrooms by allowing them at local option to count Horace Mann charters and innovation schools toward that new 23% cap. And between these two measures alone, we will be bringing online tens of thousands of new seats in innovative classrooms. Additionally, the bill also creates a new process by which local actors may speed the turnaround of level 3 schools that are close to tipping into level 4 status, so that districts don't have to wait for state intervention in order to make use of increased flexibility and increased autonomy that have proven successful in other schools. Again, the idea here is to arm and empower districts to use the best practices that have shown success elsewhere. Doubling down on replication of success and best practices is also a principle that's relevant and important for charter schools, as the Senate President mentioned. And in this bill, we set and enforce high expectations that charter schools will, one, replicate the successes that some of their brethren charter operators have demonstrated in serving equal proportions of ELL students and special ed students as their sending districts. That charter operators will use discipline in a way that is consistent with state law and that is not disparate in its impact on different racial, ethnic, or gender groups. And that charters will operate under conditions that produce findings and knowledge and best practices that are actually usable for the core public school system. Specifically, what this means is that all charter seats, unless we're talking about one of the specialized schools for the high-risk students, for other schools, all charter seats will be awarded through an opt-out lottery system or through a system that is part of the sending district's own assignment system. That means no more reliance on parents self-selecting into the system by filling out an application. Students' names will automatically be placed into the lottery, and families may, of course, opt out at any time. Charter operators whose retention rates are worse than their sending districts will not be eligible for renewal at the 5-year evaluation point. This provision lifts up charter operators that are doing great work with respect to retaining and serving all students, and it puts forth a firm accountability structure for schools that are engaging in pushing kids out. And also, charters will now be required to backfill seats that become open in their schools in any grade and at any point of the school year, just like district schools are required to take students whenever they show up at any time of the school year and at any age. All of these provisions are designed to help ensure that when a charter school shows us a great new success, we will know that those results are replicable in our core public school system, so that we can make sure that we are serving those 96% of students who will continue to be educated there, in addition to the 4% who will attend charters. Because look, if we are serious about serving all students, as the proponents of the ballot question have suggested that they are, you simply can't do that with a small slice of schools that serves 4 or 6 or 8% of kids. We have got to keep our eye on the prize of serving 100% of students. I want to, at this moment, just take a step back and re-anchor to the moral standard that I have always expressed since I began this process, what feels like a very long, 2+ years ago. At that time, there was a mom from my district who wrote to me, and she said, Senator Chang-Diaz, I have a child who is in a charter school, and my other child attends the BPS. Please take care of both of my children. And that's always been the standard that I've set for myself of what kind of bill I would be willing to support and indeed advocate for. And I'm very proud to stand here today and say that this bill meets that standard. Because as you are going to hear from Chair Spilka in a minute, this bill makes very critical investments in the core of our public education system that will concretely increase opportunity for every kid in Massachusetts. It renews our commitment to innovation, and it puts forth serious mechanisms for the replication of best practices, both at the macro level and in the trenches. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Chairwoman Spilka.
Thank you, Senator Chang-Diaz. Let me start out by also thanking Senate President Rosenberg, especially for having the vision to form this working group. We have spent many hours, as you heard, hundreds of hours, not only in meetings. Every Wednesday afternoon, we would all converge in the Senate President's office for 2, 3, sometimes more hours. During the week, we all did research, we met. We have put in hundreds of hours, if not hundreds of hundreds, along with our staff. So I'd like to thank not only my colleagues that are here, Senator Chang-Diaz, Senator Jalen, and Senator Wolf, but all of our staffs. I know especially the last few weeks, they have been here till almost midnight or beyond working on this issue because this is such a critically important issue for our kids and for the Commonwealth's future. So thank you all. Let me say also that I'm very proud that the Senate took this bill as an opportunity to address funding and fairness and innovation for all of our students, no matter where in the Commonwealth they reside, what school they go to, what type of school, what district. This will help all of our students. We are in a unique moment now. We can take what we learned from over 20 years of education reform and make sure that we have the tools in place to fairly and adequately, truly adequately fund our education system. We also have an opportunity, a unique opportunity with this bill that we are revealing and releasing today to bring charter school opponents and proponents together to work collaboratively to ensure the success of all of our children. And you will hear that as a theme throughout this bill. That doesn't happen as often as it should, especially in an area that is as important as the education of our children. This bill creates incentives for innovation and makes sure everyone has a stake in the success of all of our schools and all of our kids. It addresses the concerns that we have heard over the years that charters are sometimes funded at the expense of traditional public schools by putting both traditional and charters in the same budget bucket. It provides a safeguard against underfunding by proportionately reducing the cap lift if the Foundation Budget Review Commission's recommendations are not fully funded. So we phase in 7 years of the Foundation Budget Review Commission. Every year is a 0.5% cap lift, but if we do not fully fund, then the cap is only lifted proportionately as to what we funded. So if the goal is, or the target is, to fund at $200 million, and we do it, and we're able to do it, the cap would be lifted the full amount at 0.5%. If we hit a recession and we cannot, or we can only fund, say, $100 million, then the cap would be lifted to 0.25 for that corresponding ratio. Additionally, it's important to know that the ballot question, as was stated by Senator Chang Diaz, only addresses 4% of students in charter schools. That cost is approximately $1 billion. So we would be spending $1 billion on 4% of the students across the Commonwealth over 6 years. For the RISE Act, for approximately the same cost, it would address 100% of our students. 100% of our students would see a benefit of also approximately $1 billion investment. So you have $1 billion on one hand for 6 years for 4% of our students versus $1 billion on the other hand for 7 years for 100% of our students. I ask you to answer what makes more sense. Let me repeat that this bill helps all of our students, no matter where they are, at approximately the same cost. That is a key provision of this bill. Also, the legislation replaces charter school reimbursement funding with district impact mitigation, and similar to the governor's budget, with payments over 3 years. The first year would be 100%, second year 50%, and third year 25%. I believe, as my colleagues here do, that education is the most powerful tool we have for our future. And so again, in this bill, we invest in all of our schools, all of our students, and make sure that the schools are fairly and adequately funded. With this bill, we will be creating more resilient, stronger kids, more resilient, stronger schools, and with resilient, stronger children, they will grow up to contribute for a strong, thriving, and resilient Commonwealth. I can imagine no more important goal. Thank you. And with that, I would like to bring up my colleague, Senator Dan Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And what an honor it is to be here today, and what an honor it has been to be part of a working group. And I want to, Senate President, I want to applaud you for bringing us all together. Somebody said team of rivals. I'm not sure I would go that far, but I think what we attempted to do in this working group was really bridge some of the false dichotomies that have arisen since 1993, when we originally empowered the charter school movement here. And what I have the privilege of doing, I think, is dealing with some of the more controversial specifics of this bill. But I want to say to my colleagues, thank you for helping to educate me on this issue. As the Senate President said, I do have some personal experience. Before I got into public policy and before I ran for office, two of my daughters, one went to the Sturgis School, which is an IB school on Cape Cod, now has 800 students, and a really successful charter school. And my youngest daughter went to the Lighthouse Charter School, which is now located in my hometown of Harwich. I served on the board of the Sturgis School back in the early 2000s as it was getting its IB certification. So coming with that personal experience and certainly understanding how it can be transformative, and then coming into the public policy arena and really understanding the relationship, the power that charter schools have, but the relationship and commitment that we have to all of the students of the Commonwealth. This process for me personally has been one of enlightenment and been quite a journey. So I'm going to cover some of the specifics in the bill. First of all, we do insist in this bill a higher level of charter school transparency and governance. And what we are asking for in this bill is that charter schools have a higher level of transparency as it relates to finances, contracts, policies, board meetings, up to the level and standard that the district schools have, so that in the district there is transparency, both for those who are involved in the charter schools, but for those who aren't, for those who really want a window into how these schools are working. We do also reform the waitlist procedure so that the charter schools from this point forward would be prohibited from carrying over students on the waitlist. What that does, I think, is give us a much more accurate understanding of the waitlist, who's on it, and therefore better understanding relative to public policy as it addresses the waitlist. We also specify that the boards will have seats specifically for teachers and for parents as well. As we read in the Globe this morning, thank you, David, there has been an issue around the Commonwealth about whether or not there is enough parent participation on the boards of these schools. So we spell that out and we address it, I think, in some very thoughtful ways. As far as admission and retentions, the charters must admit new students when a student leaves, because as Senator Chang Diaz noted, some of the statistics get skewed if there is sort of a selecting process of who remains at the charter school. So what we are requiring in this bill is that when a student leaves a charter school, that seat is filled. There are no mandatory fees or contracts allowed at the charter schools, a practice that has, I think, proliferated at the charter schools, and this bill would eliminate. And as Senator Chang Diaz stated, it replaces the opt-in requirement for admission with an opt-out requirement or unified enrollment, as we're already seeing the city of Boston move towards. As far as the teachers are concerned, recognizing that we have a standard for certification right now for 96% of the students who are being taught by teachers that have teaching certificates, this bill does require a path for certification for all of the teachers, including those in charter schools. This is specifically critical, we think, as it relates to students with special needs. And so we think that's a very important part of this bill. We do also recognize that decades ago, there was a movement in Massachusetts for collective bargaining for the teachers at our publicly funded public schools around the Commonwealth. While we do not directly insist on collective bargaining units within the charter schools, we do have a stipulation in there that should the charter school teachers form a collective bargaining unit, that they will be guaranteed benefits and wages commensurate with the benefits and wages at the district school where the charter school exists. And then we also, in this bill, establish a requirement that there be at least a teacher representative on the Board of Education, the State Board of Education. So I guess you guys left me all of these controversial points, but no, nothing controversial. I do want to say at the end, though, I came into this process really wondering whether this could be a bill that satisfies everybody or whether we would end up with a bill that satisfies nobody. And as I come out of the process, I can actually see aspects of both. I don't think there's a single advocacy group that I either talk to as part of this group or individually that there is not a real component in this bill that addresses concerns and that really works towards what they were looking for in this charter bill. For us, and I'm going to speak just for a moment about why it's so important that we deal with this at the legislature, for us to allow this to go to the ballot, which will expose potentially at a 12-school lift a year the citizens of the Commonwealth to over $300 million a year of additional expense, and that's just at the state level, could be seen as reckless and irresponsible. What I love about this bill is, embodied in this bill is a way to address that and proactively look at the funding in a way that will adequately and responsibly fund our public school systems going forward. Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I give the podium back to you.
Okay, very good. So thank you. I just can't help it. I'm just busting with pride this morning because you folks have done just absolutely an amazing job, and I just want to really thank you, and it makes me proud to be a member of the Senate to work with people of your caliber who have the bandwidth and the creativity to take this kind of a knotty problem and turn it into an amazing opportunity for the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and so I want to acknowledge that. And again, thank the staff and all who participated in the meetings and the research and all of the work that brought us to putting this bill forward. I'm also going to give a few acknowledgments at this point because a lot of educational leaders and others were involved in the discussions, and just want to highlight a few of them at the risk of missing some important people, and I will ask for their apologies in advance, but there are some key organizations and people such as Tom Scott, the Executive Director, and Andre Ravenel, the Superintendent of Schools in Fitchburg, who's the current President of the Mass Association of School Committees. So the staff and superintendents have been actively involved in this discussion, as well Mary Bork from Chelsea Public Schools as superintendent there. She'll be coming into the presidency of MASS shortly, and she served as a member of the Foundation Budget Review Commission. Also, Glenn Kuchar, who's the Executive Director of the Mass Association of School Committees. We thank you. Vanessa Calderon Rosado, a former member of the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, who worked with us and participated in this effort. And David Bunker, the former state representative and consultant to the Foundation Budget Review Commission, for his excellent work over a long period of time on education reform and this effort that we're putting forward today. A special shout out to someone who couldn't be here this morning, and that is the former chair and current member of the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education and Suffolk University President Margaret McKenna, who could not be with us today, but she asked us to note her support for the Senate's process and to recognize both the hard work that went into the bill and to acknowledge the strong step forward that this bill makes in this debate, which we hope will lead to very positive outcomes. And with that, I will open the floor to questions, and I'll ask the members of the working group to respond to as many of them as they're comfortable. And the default position will be the Chair of Education, Senator Chang Diaz, our leader in this effort.
Mr. President,
yes.
Or whoever wants it, given the decision to tie any cap lift to what appears to be substantial new investment in public education with no guarantee that that money will ever be appropriated by the legislature, why do you think, or do you have any degree of confidence that the ballot petitioners will will accept a proposal like this and stop their process from going back?
So if I may, I'll give a first answer if anybody else wishes to join. So the first answer is that we set out to create a vision here and to show how education, public education, should move forward in the Commonwealth. If the result of this is that the ballot question comes off, that would be terrific. I think that would be a terrific outcome. There are those on both sides who disagree. There are people who are against charters and for charters who want this battle to be fought in November on the streets. We believe in the legislative process, and we hope that the work that we do here might in fact get people to reconsider and realize that the best place to resolve public policy is right here in the legislature with the representatives and senators and the governor elected by the people. That said, now the second part of the question is critical, and I would respond by saying that in 1993, when we passed ed reform, the same question was asked. How can we trust that the legislature is going to do this? We didn't miss a payment. It was a 7-year program, and we funded it every year, no matter what happened. And in fact, you'll remember, some of you who are old enough, you'll remember the balcony meetings between Tom Finneran and Tom Birmingham as we went into the fall before we had a state budget. Why? Because one of them said, we made a promise to the people and the children of Massachusetts, and we're going to keep that promise. And we kept that promise, even though that budget was many months late.
Are you suggesting we're going back to days of negotiating budgets months?
Only that if you have the will and the political courage and the will, you will do what needs to be done. So we were able to pay for this out of growth revenues in the annual budget in '93, and this is another multi-year commitment on the same scale in a stronger economy, in a robust economic period. And so I'm quite confident that if we make this commitment, because this is what the business community tells us is the #1 priority. Education and worker training is the #1 issue that holds back the growth in the economy. And so we want to make this promise, and we want to keep this promise. Anyone want to add?
Yeah, and just to follow up with that, this bill makes the commitment that when we are talking about all of our children, it is very clear and very simple. We are really talking about all of our children here. And it does set forth a path to fund it. It is doable. It was done, as the Senate President said previously. And this is just as strong, if not stronger. I was not in the legislature during that time. I don't think any of us was. But it is even a stronger Senate President in terms of the actual working group. The Senate President gave us a lot of leeway. Yes. And he knows better than we do.
Somebody bring me my walker.
The strength of that commitment. And it is just as strong. So it's doable, it's strong. And it's written into the bill, the promise that we are out there to help. As you heard, the businesses are in favor, but I would also add all of our superintendents, all of our teachers, all of our parents. When each one of us in the Senate are out in our district, this is the #1 issue that we hear. Fund education, and fund the Foundation Budget Review Commission. That we have talked about adequately funding this formula and adequately funding education for all of our kids for years now. This is a clear, express commitment that is doable. And by the way, if we don't fulfill it, we will have, once again, both the proponents of charters and the opponents of charters unified in lobbying us, trying to persuade us. They'll be working together. That's one of the beauties of this. It's sprinkled throughout the bill, opportunities for them to work together to make sure that we fulfill our promise.
Could you guys clarify? I just want to add a couple things that I want to make sure don't get lost in there. That, in the remarks made by proponents of the ballot question and people that I have sat with, one-on-one and in small groups many, many times, people who are proponents of lifting the charter cap, I have heard over and over emphatic statements, which I believe, that proponents of the cap lift are interested and motivated by, in fact, educating all students. And that's what we're proposing to do here. It's very simple. And I think we should take proponents at their word, at face value, that that's what they're interested in, and reach out a hand to them and say, let's do this together. That's one. Two, it's important to remember that the foundation formula funds charter seats as well as district seats, right? So this is a formula that will benefit very directly in very real financial terms both sets of schools.
Well, I guess the question then is, if this is doable and affordable, can we expect the Senate to include a significant, you could do this in Chapter 70 right now and put it into your budget this very year, a significant increase in funding that would help districts pay for charter seats and schools. Can we expect to see that in the Senate budget?
Well, we're in the process of working on the Senate budget. As I think most people know, it's a tight year. So we're working, and we will be doing the best we can.
But you could say that 2 years from now, that it's a tight budget and we can't afford the increase.
Not when it's state law.
Right. That definitely gives a lot more credence and emphasis, and we're bound to it much stronger. So, again, that would make it a much stronger probability.
Ye of little faith.
Could you clarify, first of all, what the alternative educational services are that would lift schools out of the cap? And secondly, on the funding piece, is the $200 million only in year 7? And does that, I guess, clarify how that funding piece works?
Sure, you're talking about the high-risk population schools. So the examples that I gave really, I think, build out that definition, right? So we're talking primarily about students who have dropped out and are returning to school, teens who are pregnant and parenting, and homeless students.
In terms of the funding piece, then?
What's that?
And the question about the funding piece is the $200 million figure that you gave in year 7 once it's fully implemented?
We're approximating it would be to implement this about 200, give or take, every year of the 7 years. We set forth, and I don't want to go into the weeds, but we do include a process to determine how much that obligation or that promise would be per year. And it would be somewhat similar to the consensus revenue process that we currently have to set the revenue growth, where the House Chair of Ways and Means, the Senate Chair of Ways and Means, and the Secretary of A&F would take in testimony and speak with the experts and come up with a number that would be that would fulfill the promise for that year. But when you look at the ballot initiative, if that went forward, going to the full 12 per year, the last year, for example, would be a little over $300 million to implement that, and again, for only 4% of our kids.
Senator Spilka, what makes you so confident that the two sides that are diametrically opposed on this issue would unite to lobby the legislature about this bill?
Not to be facetious, but money does a lot. There's a lot of incentive there, and if we don't do it, as has been noted, all of the students, they're funded through the net school spending. So both the charter students and the regular school students benefit by increasing net school spending. So there is a direct incentive for them to be working together.
Does the inclusion of the Horace Mann and the innovation schools in the net school spending formula mean that a district could, in theory, preclude any new Commonwealth charters going forward?
In theory, it would be hard, right? That would, but yes, in theory, that is a possibility. I want to just jump back to something that the gentleman before asked about parents. If you talk to the people at the grassroots of both of these movements, right, both sides, they're not diametrically opposed, right? The legislation that they may be asking for is, but they're parents who love their kids and who care about their kids, and they actually hate being on opposite sides from each other. They understand why people on the other side are making the choices that they do, and I think that there's a real natural affinity there. And the reason we expect people are going to come and advocate together is because they all care about their kids and want a good education for them. It's that simple.
Senator Spoken, how much? Before we do that, you want to say something, and I wanted to clarify one point.
One thing back to Michael, your question. One of the most controversial, important issues has to do with local control relative to more charter schools. what the issue you just raised actually in an interesting way does that. Because districts that want to innovate through more innovation schools and Horace Mann schools have the ability to hit the cap by investing in those methods of innovation. So in an interesting way, we built in a way of getting to local control without, as direct or some of the proponents of local control would have wanted. So again, I think we struck a really interesting balance with investing in innovation in education, but also making sure that there wasn't additional expense forced into communities without their ability to have input and control.
Do those schools count towards the cap, though? I mean, would that effectively shave the size of the cap lift if you counted
So
those schools?
it's up to the discretion of the community as to whether they want to count those schools towards the cap or not. And that's the way that this actually gives them more local control. Because if they choose to count the Horace Mann and innovation schools towards the cap, they can choose to do that.
But they don't have to.
But they don't have to.
They don't have to. And a couple of things to note also. Horace Mann charters still have to be approved by the state board. So it's not, you can't do that entirely just by getting your local stakeholders together and saying, we're going to stand up some schools just to block Commonwealth charters. Additionally, what we're doing here is basically taking the model that so many people point to in the charter sector as working and saying, let's give the opportunity and the encouragement to districts to replicate it. So this is, in a place where many critics, and I think it's a fair and right critique, say that the state has not done a good job over the last 20 plus years of adhering to the original purpose of charter schools, of being laboratories of innovation that should return best practices back to the core system. This is a play that we're making to deepen our work there. And this is the macro level replication, right? One thing we haven't hit on is the teacher exchange for sharing of best practices at the trench level. But encouraging and incentivizing districts to take that model and use it internal in their district is a way that we do sharing of best practices.
Dave, Senator Spilker or Senator Chandias, can you speak to how much of the $200 million is a local contribution, or whether there's local contribution on top of that built in? How does that work?
That's state.
It's all state
It's
money.
all state money, but the local municipalities will be required to match that in some way?
Well, they put in their contribution, whatever that might be.
For Chapter 71.
Right.
Okay. Do you know roughly?
It would vary widely from district to district.
And it varies now, and that changes every year as well.
So is there some concern about this essentially adding fiscal burden to cities and towns as a result?
So, I encourage you to talk to the members of the Foundation Budget Review Commission, who were very aware that changing the foundation budget it triggers both the state responsibility and a local responsibility. And that was a unanimously supported set of recommendations coming out of the FBRC, of which there were many municipal and district level stakeholders. So they get it, they have no illusions about what's happening, but we're very vocal in their support for those recommendations. I also, just for context, to put this $200 million number in some context, if the governor had followed through on his campaign commitment to fund local education aid from the state, apace with growth in state revenues, we would see that $200 million in the fiscal 17 budget. So just to get
4.3% growth.
Exactly 4.3% growth in Chapter 78 would yield about $200 million this coming year.
Anyone else?
The timeline, when will we be taking this up in the Senate?
We will be discussing that this morning. Yeah, it's still morning. We'll be discussing that this morning, and the probability is we will have a debate next week.
A vote next week also?
Well, yes, debate follows. The vote follows the debate, yes.
Okay. I know that.
Debate without votes is useless. We've had plenty of that. Are we all set? Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.